الرحمن الرحیم مالک یوم الدین ایاک نعبد و ایاک نستعین اہدنا الصراط المستقیم صراط الذین انعمت علیہم غیر المغضوب علیہم ولا الضالین۔ جس طرح آپ لوگوں کے علم ہے کہ یہ مجلس اصالہ ثواب کی جناب قربان نادر علی رضا صاحب کی اصالہ ثواب کی مجلس ہے، آپ لوگوں سے التماس ہے کہ اپنے تمام مرحومین بالخصوص قربان نادر رضا کے لیے ایک سورہ فاتحہ پڑھ کے ان کو اس کا ثواب ارسال فرمائیں۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ مجلس کا آغاز ایک مختصر کلام کے ساتھ بر محمد و آل محمد بلند تر صلوات۔ آؤ رو لے شہ کربلا کو، زندگی کا بھروسہ نہیں ہے۔ آؤ رو لے شہ کربلا کو، زندگی کا بھروسہ نہیں ہے۔ جو بھی گرتا ہے اس غم میں آنسو، کوئی بیکار جاتا نہیں ہے۔ آؤ رو لے شہ کربلا کو، جب جلے ہوں گے خیمے حرم کے، جب چھینی ہوں گی سر سے ردائیں، جب جلے ہوں گے خیمے حرم کے، جب چھینی ہوں گی سر سے ردائیں، کیا بنی ہوگی سیدانیوں پر، کیا بنی ہوگی سیدانیوں پر، وہ سما دل سے جاتا نہیں ہے۔ آؤ رو لے شہ کربلا کو صلوات۔ بہر تعظیم اٹھو اے اکبر، پردہ داری کرو میرے دلبر۔ بہر تعظیم اٹھو اے اکبر، پردہ داری کرو میرے دلبر۔ آ رہی ہے سواری پھوپھی کی، آ رہی ہے سواری پھوپھی کی، جس کا کوئی سہارا نہیں ہے۔ آؤ رو لے شہ کربلا کو، کربلا میں جو جائے گی زینب، کیا بتائے گی بھائی کو زینب۔ کربلا میں جو جائے گی زینب، کیا بات بتائے گی بھائی کو زینب، چھٹ کے زندہ سے جو آ رہے ہیں، چھوٹ کے زندہ سے جو آ رہے ہیں، ان میں بالی سکینہ نہیں ہے۔ آؤ رو لیں شاہ کربلا کو، پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ اب میں جناب بابر علی مہدی سے درخواست کروں گا کہ وہ آ کے اپنا کلام پیش فرمائیں۔ جناب بابر علی مہدی پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
ایک بار درود پڑھ دیجیے۔ نادر رضا صاحب کی برسی ہے 1 سال، تو بہت ساری یادیں ان سے ہماری سینٹر کی ہیں، اور بہت کچھ یاد آیا راستے میں مجھے۔ میرے ساتھ بڑی ان کی شفقت تھی، lived very good life، اور بہت اچھی سکسیسفل پیچھے فیملی چھوڑ کے گئے الحمدللہ۔ تو آج ان کی برسی ہے، تو میں میر انیس میر دبیر کا ایک منقبہ ہے امام حسین علیہ السلام کی شان میں، پھر امام حسین علیہ السلام کے ہی کربلا کے متعلق سوز پیش کروں گا۔ درود پڑھیے محمد و آل محمد۔
مٹ کر بنا جو زیست کی، توقیر کون تھا، مٹ کر بنا جو زیست کی، توقیر کون تھا، جس نے بدل دی دہر کی تقدیر کون تھا، وہ قصہ حیات کا عنوان بے مثال، وہ صبر و امتحان کی تصویر کون تھا، روکا تھا جس نے گردش لیل و نہار کو، پہنائی جس نے وقت کو زنجیر کون تھا۔ درود پڑھیں محمد علیہ محمد۔ تیروں کے سائے میں کبھی تیغوں کی باڑ میں، تیروں کے سائے میں کبھی تیغوں کی باڑ میں، پڑھتا رہا جو ہر گھڑی
تکبیر کون تھا. درود پڑھی محمد علیہ وسلم. ایک ہر ایک یزید ایک ہی جھٹکے میں کٹ گیا. ہر ایک یزید ایک ہی جھٹکے میں کٹ گیا. شمشیر کیا تھی صاحب شمشیر کون تھا. اور دیکھیے قافلہ ردیف چل رہا ہے کہ کون تھا، اور آخری شعر میں اس کو کھولتے ہیں. ایک لا الہ کے حرف پہ ہر چیز وار دی. انسان تھا فرشتہ تھا شبیر کون تھا. انسان تھا فرشتہ تھا شبیر کون تھا. جس نے بدل دی دہر کی تقدیر کون تھا. دودھ پڑی محمد عالم. پھر ایک بات ضرور پڑھی محمد عالم. میں ایک سوز پڑھتا ہوں جو کہ بہت مجلس کی قبولیت کے لیے بہترین کلام ہے اور تمام مومنین کو پسند بھی ہے. درود پڑھی محمد علیہ وسلم. مجرئی خلق میں ان آنکھوں نے کیا کیا ہاں دیکھا. گھر لٹے قید ہوئی بھائی کا لاشا ہاں دیکھا. مجرئی خلق میں کہتی تھی زینب مستر کے خدا خیر کرے. کہتی تھی زینب مستر کے خدا خیر کرے. رات کو خواب میں اریاں سر زہرا ہاں دیکھا. مجرئی خلق میں گر پڑے سیبتے نبی تھام کے، ہاتھوں سے جگر گر پڑے سیبتے نبی تھام کے، ہاتھوں سے جگر علی اکبر کو جو ریتی پہ تڑپتا ہاں دیکھا، مجرئی خلق میں نے دیکھا عالم شاہ کو آلودہ خون، میں نے عباس کو بے جان لب دریا ہاں دیکھا، مجرئی خلق میں نے دیکھا شاہ مظلوم کو خنجر کے تلے میں نے نیزے پہ سرے دلبر زہرا ہاں دیکھا، مجرئی خلق میں ایک گٹھڑی شاہدی پشت پہ لائے، اس میں ایک گٹھڑی شاہدی پشت پہ لائے، اس میں میں نے ٹکڑے ہوئے قاسم کا سراپا ہاں دیکھا، مجرئی خلق میں دودھ پڑی محمد آل محمد پر، اور ایک دفعہ الحمد شریف، 3 دفعہ کل شریف پڑھ کے ناظر رضا صاحب کی مغفرت کے لیے بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم الحمد للہ رب العالمین الرحمن الرحیم بسم اللہ اللہ واحد اللہ الصمد اللہم صلی علی محمد وعلی
ماشاء اللہ بابر بھائی بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ جز حسین ابن علی کون کہانی کس کی، جز حسین ابن علی کون کہانی کس کی، آج تک ہو نہ سکی بات پرانی کس کی، دجلہ وقت نے اپنائی روانی کس کی، موج کوثر سے ملی تشنہ دہانی کس کی، لشکر ظلم کو مٹی میں ملایا کس نے، سو کے مقتل کو دو عالم کو جگایا کس نے، वो हुसैन इब्न अली वक्त की तहजीब का नाज, जिसने अफशा किया इंसान की तौकीर का राज, जिसका हर ज़ख्म है सरमाया-ए तक़दीर हिजाज, जिसने तीरों के मुसल्ले पे अदा की है नमाज। गर्म झोंकों से जो अहवाले सबा पूछता है, गर्म झोंकों से जो अहवाले सबा पूछता है, ज़ेरे खंजर भी जो खालिक की रज़ा पूछता है। बर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु। अब मैं हुज्जतुल इस्लाम वल मुस्लिमीन सैयद सलेमान हसन आबदी से दरख्वास्त करूँगा कि आके मजलिस से खिताब फरमाएँ। बर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
Suratul Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين فاطر السماوات والأرضين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين، شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين، سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد وهو أصدق القائلين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وبالوالدين إحسانا إما يبلغن عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is a majlis of remembrance and sending a gift of devotion and reward to a very dearly departed member of our family and our community, Marhum Qurban Raza Nadir. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate his rank and to grant him the company of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimus salatu wassalam, whom he loved and whose remembrance he kept alive in his life. And that love and that remembrance, that purity and that piety is the most important legacy that Marhum Nadir or any mu'min can leave behind for their loved ones and for their families. So may Allah give him the reward and the blessing, the barakah of that sincerity and that devotion and love. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And one of the best things that we can do when we gather to remember our deceased loved ones and to send them this gift of a majlis and a gathering of devotion is to talk about those teachings that are our most important possession and our most important legacy. Even more important than for you to talk about my life after I have left this world is for you to talk about my values. Because the circumstances of my life, they are just coincidences, events, certain things that come and then they pass. Many of those details, they become fuzzy even in our own memories after a few years. Sometimes you may have experienced this. You see a picture of an event that you remember, but then there is somebody in the picture that you don't remember being there. Or you watch a video of something that took place in your family or in your life from many decades ago, and that video is not exactly the way you remember it. Maybe some of the events are a little bit different, something that was said is a little bit different, because our own memory is not a perfect representation of the past. And that's when we have our memory and when we have our intellect. But as the Quran says, there are those people who grow old, لِكَيْ لَا يَعْلَمَ, that they don't remember after having had knowledge anything of their own life. So those memories, they sometimes are lost to our own brain, our own person, let alone to others. But if we remember our values, then those values are eternal. My memories may fade. My life may come to an end. And my children, and even more likely my grandchildren, and almost certainly my great-grandchildren, may not have much of a knowledge of the circumstances of my life. Especially with the pace of change, we can't imagine how our great-grandparents lived without electricity, without modern technology. We can't even imagine that life. And our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren, they probably will not be able to imagine our life even if they could see it, and they won't see it. So the point is that, remember, don't focus on that which is going to be forgotten and that which is not meant to last, but focus on that which is deeper and more profound and which is everlasting. Because during those moments of our life, when we make the memories, there are values that we are affirming. The event will come to an end. The memory will stay with us, and then it will also be forgotten. But the values that we revive and that we remember and that we honor in those moments, those values, they are going to be there for our eternal soul, and they will be of benefit to our family and to our children after ourselves. And among the most important of those values is to remember and to honor our parents. Allah says in Surah Al-Isra, or Surah Bani Israel, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ. It is the decree of Allah and the command of Allah that you will worship none but Him. And as we know, that is the fundamental principle of Islam. If you want to summarize Islam in a single concept, then it is the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because all of our beliefs, they come from that belief that there is one God. There is one origin for all of humanity and for all of creation. And that one source of our existence is the one who is infinitely perfect. His knowledge, His power, His wisdom, His mercy is infinite. And so there is no deficiency, no imperfection, no lacking in the essence and in the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the basis for our faith. That is the basis for worshiping Allah. That is the basis for relying on Allah. That is the basis for all of our actions in our life, whether it be our rituals, salat, and psalm, fasting, praying, or any of the other acts of worship that we do, or the way that we treat other people, our family, our fellow believers, even those people who are opponents of our faith, or maybe enemies of our person. We still treat them with dignity, respect, and justice because they are creatures of the same God who created us. They may be enemies of me, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them their sustenance. He doesn't say that because you are an enemy of so-and-so, I'm not going to give you oxygen to breathe. I'm not going to give you water to drink. I am not going to give you food to sustain your life. There's a very famous incident narrated from Prophet Ibrahim, alayhi wa ala nabiyyina wa alihi salatu wa salam, salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi, that he invited somebody to come and eat with him for a meal. And this was the character of Prophet Ibrahim, that he never used to eat a meal alone. He would always host somebody, and if there was nobody, then he would find somebody. But once it is narrated that he invited somebody with that same sincerity and that same generosity, and he found out that that person did not believe in God. Because when they sat down to the meal, the person was not ready to say Bismillah. And so, Prophet Ibrahim, because of his humility before God and his recognition of the importance of believing in God, he lost his motivation to host that person, and that guest left. And then Allah revealed to Prophet Ibrahim that this person had lived his entire life and I did not refuse to host him. So how are you going to honor me by showing harshness because of his ignorance or his lack of belief? And when he got that insight, the initial harshness of Ibrahim alayhi salam was because of his love for Allah. But then Allah reminded him that there is a better expression of that love, which is to recognize that the same God who created you and gave you the honor of recognizing Him also created those human beings who may not recognize their Lord. And many of them are not intrinsically evil, they just have not been exposed to what effect the love of God and the worship of God has on a person's heart and on a person's life. And so Prophet Ibrahim went running after that person. He may have gone some distance, and then when he came, he begged him, come back and accept my invitation. And the man said that I have not changed my beliefs. So what has changed about your willingness to host me? And Ibrahim alayhi salam said that my Lord told me that He has shown you mercy in spite of your unbelief. It is not worthy for me, His Prophet, to be less generous with you than the one who created you and is responsible for your existence, and the one to whom you are answerable. You are not answerable to me, you are answerable to Allah. And then with humility, he brought that person back to his house, and this was the way that that person was introduced to Tawheed and became a believer in the God of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Salawatullah Muhammad. So all of our beliefs, our practices, our morals, they are rooted in Tawheed. Tawheed does not teach us to be harsh towards unbelievers. It teaches us to be merciful and kind and compassionate even to unbelievers, because they are the creatures of the same God who created us. He gave us a gift of Iman that He has not given them. But He is their Lord, He is their sustainer, and we are not responsible for their actions for me to be judgmental about whether they are believers or not. So Tawheed is the foundation of everything in our faith, for our own lives and for our interactions. But then immediately after Tawheed, Allah mentions our parents. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. The second decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is do good and ihsan and be kind towards your parents, regardless of whether they are believers or unbelievers. Regardless of how they treat you and how they are to you, you should always be kind and act towards them with ihsan. That is not just one of the commandments of God, but it is immediately after Tawheed itself, as a fundamental defining attribute of our religion and its value system. And then the Quran expands on what ihsan is. إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرَ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا. If you are present with your parents, and one of them or both of them reach old age, then consider that to be a gift. Consider that to be an honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon you. Not an inconvenience, but rather a blessing. فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Don't say so much as uff to them, and don't scold them, and speak to them a noble word. Now, this is a teaching of the Quran that reminds us that the struggle we have with our elders or with our parents is not something new. Sometimes people think that the time of the Prophet was an ideal time. Families were close-knit. Children respected their parents and respected their elders. If there was some ideal, or if it were easier at that time, then the Quran would not need to emphasize. The Quran says, لَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, because people would say uff to their parents. وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا, and the Quran says, don't scold them, because people either would scold their parents or they would be tempted when the parent says something that the child does not agree with, or maybe when the child thinks the parents are being unfair or are being short-tempered or are being irritable, so then, even in the time of the Prophet, even in the time of the Imams, there was that response that comes almost without realizing it. And the Quran says, keep control of your tongue. Doesn't start always from the inside. Sometimes you get angry. Sometimes you get frustrated when you feel like you are not being understood or when you are not being heard. And especially for those of us who are younger, then it is a difficult transition when you go from your parents being your caretakers and being your advisors and being more experienced than you are, to maybe a stage when now you are their caretaker. Maybe you might have more education or more knowledge or more experience or certainly more physical strength than they have. That's not something that you have experienced until now. The role has shifted. They would take care of you, and now maybe they are dependent on you. So it takes some preparation. The Quran gives us guidance that start by controlling your tongue. Speak and act in a kind manner. Gradually it will enter into your heart and it will enter into your soul. Don't worry if you might be frustrated. Don't worry if you might feel like you are not being heard. Talk and act in the way that your religion teaches you and in the way that your ideals tell you, and slowly you will begin to develop the strength of character and the self-control to also feel the emotions that you should feel towards your parents, even at times of disagreement or at times of frustration. And the Quran says, وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Speak a noble word towards your parents. There is a hadith of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam that explains قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Because sometimes our parents may say something or may do something that is unfair. Now the Quran is a practical book. It's not just a theoretical book that's meant to give you teachings that look good, but that do not actually guide you in your lived experience. It is a book meant to be practiced. It is a book that, yes, sounds good in theory, but also works well in practice. And so sometimes if you have a teaching that when somebody oppresses you, turn the other cheek, that doesn't work. Sometimes it's actually an injustice because it encourages the person to show more oppression or more unkindness than they did in the past. The Quran doesn't give that teaching. It teaches us that forgiveness is good in its place. But when forgiveness is going to cause somebody to become arrogant or increase their injustice, then the Quran doesn't teach us to go and forgive. The Quran teaches us to stand up for our rights, to stand up for our dignity, and to seek justice, but to do so without becoming vengeful and without becoming aggressive. So similarly with our parents, sometimes it might be the case that our parents say something that is unjust. And the Quran doesn't tell us ignore it. The Quran doesn't tell us deny it. Because if I live in denial, then the frustration may build up within me. If I ignore it, then that relationship may never be able to be repaired or become healthy. So Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, he says that if your parents are unjust towards you, then say, غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمَا. May Allah forgive you. فَذَلِكَ مِنْكَ قَوْلٌ كَرِيمٌ. That is an honorable response. Now, if you look at it in practice, what is غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمَا? It is an acknowledgement that there was an injustice that was done. It's not denial or ignoring. If you are harsh to me and I say, may Allah forgive you, then immediately you might feel like I have insulted you back because I am calling you out and I am telling you that what you did was wrong. And you might not like it. But if you think about it, rather than respond to an insult with an insult, rather than to respond when somebody raises their voice by raising my own voice, what am I doing? It might sound a little bit unexpected. It may even sound harsh. But I am calling you out in the kindest and in the best way by saying, I recognize that what you did was wrong. I am not going to blind myself to it, but I am going to show you that I care about you, and I'm going to call you out not by saying you are evil or you are dead to me or I don't want to see you again or any of the other things that we say when we are angry. We recognize what was the fact. We recognize that we were wronged, and then we say to the other person that I am going to pray for you and I am going to express my love for you. غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمَا. May Allah forgive you this lapse or this shortcoming. So you're taking a stand and you are drawing a clear boundary of what is right and what is wrong. In the moment, the person that you are speaking to may not appreciate it. But that is the foundation for a healthy relationship, because when you are a doormat, sometimes you only enable the other person to continue to be unjust. And sometimes they don't even realize that what they are doing is unjust. But notice how beautifully the Quran teaches us to draw that boundary so that we are not doing it in an unkind way. We are doing it with the greatest kindness. That my prayer is that God will remove this mistake from your tongue, from your character, remove it from your book of deeds in the hereafter, so that you are forgiven and you are not going to be punished for the injustice that you have done. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So this teaching of the Quran, it gives us an ideal, but it's not just a theoretical ideal, it is a very practical ideal. And when something is wrong, you recognize it in your heart and even in your words, but you don't allow it to draw a line between you and your parents. You draw a line between haqq and batil, and then you try to ensure that you can pull your parents inside that line. If they are standing on the side of batil, you try to lovingly bring them towards the side of haqq by praying to Allah for their forgiveness. وَذَلِكَ مِنْكَ قَوْلٌ كَرِيمٌ. That is an honorable word that you are speaking to your parents. So the Quran is a practical book of guidance. These lessons are meant for us to apply them in our lives. And they apply whether our parents are alive or deceased. Sometimes, because we live in a society that thinks about material existence as the true existence, we prioritize material existence. You may have heard people sometimes seriously, and sometimes maybe in a false attempt at humor or dark humor, they say, if I were dead, I wouldn't have all of these problems. That's not speech that a believer should ever say, for two reasons. One, because it reduces the value of our life, but two, because it denies, because there is no end to this life. The body might die, but the soul is reborn. That Allah يَتَوَفَّى الْأَنفُسَ حِينَ مَوْتِهَا. He takes the soul, the nafs, at the time of death. So disvaluing life is wrong. But also to consider this life to be the end of our existence is wrong. Or sometimes there is a criminal, for example, and they never got justice in this world, and then they die. And people will say things like they got off easy. But if you die, then you are standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No court of justice in this world is as fair and as comprehensive as the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when people say things like death is too easy a punishment, I want them to suffer, what they are showing us is that they don't realize what is the value of life and what is the reality of death. Otherwise, death is when you come face to face with supreme justice and the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our relationships, they are not just about this world. Our relationship to our parents is not limited to when they are alive, but rather it belongs to both the period when they are alive and when they have left this world. When they are alive, as the Quran says, that treat them with ihsan. But that ihsan continues when they are no longer alive. It is narrated that our fourth Imam, Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zainul Abidin alayhim as-salatu was-salam, he was known as very loving to his mother. But he would not eat with her. And people who were with the Imam in his family, they noticed this. That, oh Imam, you express so much love for your mother, but we see that when you are going to go for a meal, you don't eat with her. And what we mean by eating with her at that time, they didn't have so many plates and utensils as we do today. So when people would eat together, then often that would mean that there was just one serving, and everybody would eat from the same serving. It would be one plate or one tray. The food would be put there, and they would eat together. So Imam Zainul Abidin would never share in the meal with his mother in that way. Maybe he would sit with her, but his meal would be separate. When people ask the Imam about this, that you have so much love for your mother and you have so much emphasis on Silatul Rahim, but why is it that you never share in the meal? The Imam said that I am afraid that maybe if I am eating in the same plate, she will have her eyes on one morsel of food or one bite, and without realizing it, I will take that morsel and I will eat it without realizing it. And that would be disrespectful. So I keep my food separate, because my mother deserves greater honor than even for me to eat a bite that if she knows I want to eat it, she would give it to me with both hands and derive more pleasure from my eating it than from her eating it herself. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So while our parents are alive, this was the character and the extreme amount to which Ahlul Bayt would go to show their honor and their love. And then after their parents would die, Ahlul Bayt, they had the same teaching and practice. It is narrated that in Medina, two people came to see Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. And these were the brother and sister of the Prophet in terms of his wet nurse, most likely Halima as-Sa'diyah. So the Prophet was raised for some years in his infancy and early childhood outside of Mecca, where the air was more clean and children were able to grow up in a healthier environment, and that brought a certain kind of fraternal relationship. So the children of one's wet nurse, they were like the brother and sister, and they were mahram to the Prophet. Now, a man came who was this brother of the Prophet in terms of this relationship of having been nursed by the same woman, and a lady came with the same relationship in Medina. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi when the woman came, showed her a great deal of respect, stood up, honored her, took care of her needs, because in a way she was the sister of the Prophet, not biologically, but in terms of that relationship. And people saw that, and they saw the Prophet showed a great deal of honor to that woman. Then when the man came who had the exact same relationship, the Prophet was kind as he was with everyone and courteous, but he didn't go out of his way to show the same honor to that man. And this was something unexpected for people, so when they left, they came, they said, Ya Rasulullah, why was it that you showed so much honor to that woman and you didn't show an equal amount of honor to the man? Normally people, they would give more honor to men than to women. The Prophet said that when we were children, كانت أبر بوالدها منه. He was less kind to his father than she was. Because she honored her parents more, she is more worthy of honor in the eyes of the Prophet. So we give respect, we give honor, we give praise based upon the moral values that we find in people's character. And this is the way that we encourage those values to be present in our families. When I honor somebody because they are good to their parents, when I praise somebody because they are kind to their relatives, then without even them realizing it, I am reinforcing that practice in their character and in the life of anybody who hears and sees me. That value system, now it becomes firmly enshrined within our family just by the words or by the honor that I give to people who reflect the values of Islam in their character. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he showed that honor to reinforce a value system. Even if, when the Prophet was a child, there was no Islam. There was no Islamic law that was the source of a person's actions and intentions, but there was still the fitrah, and there was still the God-given human nature. And when somebody acts according to the commandment of God, which they haven't heard from the Quran, they haven't heard from the teaching of Prophet Muhammad because he had not yet been sent as a prophet, he was himself a child. But they hear from their heart and their conscience given to them by Allah, then the Prophet said that person is worthy of honor because of that kindness. And this is how we create a value system. And we reinforce a value system and we pass it on to our younger generation. And the final point that I would like to make is that there is a way that we honor our parents after their death. And this is by keeping alive not just their name, but their legacy of values. It doesn't matter if my parents, they may have been lacking in one area of Islamic practice or another. When I say that my ideal is the sunnah, the akhlaq, the character of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimus salatu wassalam, Sallu ala Muhammad. Then I am not ma'soom. Whatever the shortcomings and the failings I may have, you honor me by honoring Muhammad wa ali Muhammad and their teachings. And in honoring their teachings, you remember me and you dedicate the reward of your good deeds to them. So it's not about trying to measure what level of practice my parents had, but rather to bring them through the grace and the mercy of Allah, through the intercession of our Prophet, to that destination which their intentions and their prayers and their efforts were working towards and were seeking. There is a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Sometimes there are people who were not good children while their parents were alive. But on the Day of Judgment, they will be raised as obedient, as kind, as good children for their parents. And then there are some people, they were very obedient and kind children while their parents were alive. But on the Day of Judgment, they will be resurrected as disobedient children. The first category will be those people who didn't recognize the blessing of their parents while the parents were alive, but when the parents were no longer alive, they kept alive their memory and their legacy. Once again, not by making a scrapbook of the pictures and the events of their parents' life. That's something that we can do if we have those resources and we can pass it on to our children, but they keep alive that legacy by doing good deeds and dedicating the reward to the parents. Every recommended act of worship that you do, every sadaqah that you give, every kindness that you do, you say that, oh Allah, if there is a reward in this for me, then give it to my parents before you give it to me. Make this a good deed that is on their behalf and not just on my behalf. And you live your life in a way that when people see you, they say, may Allah have mercy on this person's parents. They raised an upstanding member of society. The Prophet says that this person may have not been good to their parents while the parents were alive, but on the Day of Judgment, because they changed their character, their parents will see them on the Day of Judgment as an obedient son, an obedient daughter, and they will be rewarded and blessed for the kindness. But then there are other people, they may actually have been good to their parents, but then when the parents leave this world, then they forget. They don't visit the grave. They don't recite Surah Al-Fatiha. They don't remember their parents and send a gift of good deeds. They may even do good, but they don't include their parents in those intentions and in those actions. And because they forget their parents, they will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment as disobedient children. So the obligation, it continues not so long as our parents are alive, but so long as we are alive. And even if I may feel that I had some shortcoming in the past, as long as I am breathing and as long as I am alive, I can make it up. Because Allah will evaluate my actions as I grow and learn and develop throughout my own life. And so the way that we honor our parents is not to forget them. The way that we honor our parents is to try to give them a good name through our character. The way that we honor our parents is to do as much good as we can do, and then to say to Allah that the reward of this should be gifted to my parents. The way that we honor our parents is to honor those people who were close to our parents. And this is also one of the teachings of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimus salatu wassalam, that if you want to honor your parents, then remember your parents, they loved your brothers and your sisters. How many times have we seen in our own families that there are disagreements that come after the parents are no longer there, the mother is no longer there to say forgive and forget, the father is no longer there to say forgive and forget. So now those long-standing disagreements between brothers and sisters, they come to the forefront. Sometimes it's over the inheritance, or maybe the last months or years of the parent's life, because one person feels like they took more responsibility, and then somebody else is maybe being unkind to them in terms of the expenses or in terms of the inheritance, or whatever the cause may be. Sometimes there are real differences of opinion. But if we remember that our parents, they didn't just love me, who feel like I did more. They also loved my sister. They also loved my brother. They also loved their brothers and their sisters and their nephews and their nieces. And even if I feel like I have not been treated kindly, even if it feels like I have a grievance, then it gives me one reason to be soft. Not to raise my voice, not to escalate the disagreement, but to try to moderate it and bring it to a dignified resolution. In fact, a hadith tells us that not just your brothers and sisters, not just your relatives should be honored because they were beloved by your parents, but even your parents' friends, even the people that your parents took care of and took an interest in the lives of, if they're not relatives. Because of the honor of your parents, ask about those women that your mother was close to. Ask about those men that your father was close to. That is one way you honor your parents, by keeping in touch with and giving importance to their relatives, to their loved ones, even to their friendships. And this is the way that even if death may separate us physically, it keeps us together spiritually. And we can honor our parents and be close to them, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reunite us with them for our eternal life, forgiving our shortcomings and theirs. And even in the most difficult circumstances, we see that spirit of love for one's parents among Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. On the plains of Karbala, I want to just remind us of one scene, which is after all of the companions of Imam Hussein had been martyred, and after even the family members of the Imam from Banu Hashim had been martyred, Imam Hussein came to the tent of his son, Imam Zainul Abidin. And we know that Imam Zainul Abidin had been sick throughout that journey to Karbala, and on the day of Ashura, his fever was such that he was not able to stand, and he did not even know what was taking place on the battlefield. But when Imam Hussein came to him, that young son, no matter how sick he may have been himself, he looked at his father and he said, "Oh my father, what has become of you, that I see you are more sad now than I have ever seen you? You have more grief on your face than I saw when my uncle Imam Hassan was martyred, or than I saw at any other time of hardship or tragedy in your life." Imam Hussein said that, "Oh my son, there is no one alive among my companions, among my army, among my family, except for me and you. All have been martyred. And oh my beloved son, I have come to bid farewell to you, so now I can face the enemy." And this was the honor that Imam Zainul Abidin had for his father, that in spite of his own sickness and in spite of his own weakness, he turned towards his aunt Zainab, and it is reported that he said, "Oh my aunt, bring me a staff and bring me a sword." Imam Hussein said that, "Oh my son, even now you are not able to stand, you are not able to sit without support. What are you going to do with a staff? What are you going to do with a sword?" The Imam said, our fourth Imam, that, "Oh my father, you are my father. I cannot bear to see you alone. Father, I will go before the enemy. I will offer my life. I will sacrifice my soul so that you will be protected. For, oh my father, it is you who are the only grandson of the messenger of God alive on the face of the earth. When you were a child, then the prophet would look at you and he would forget all the worries of his existence. When he would look at you, then he would feel as if he were in heaven, even as he lived on the earth. Oh my father, I wish to offer my jihad and my sacrifice." And Imam Hussein said that, "Oh my son, you have a jihad to perform. You have a sacrifice to give. But, oh my beloved son, your jihad will be even more hard and even more painful than the jihad of your father." Imam Hussein is going to bid farewell to his son and his family. He is going to draw his sword. He will go alone to face the enemy. Imam Hussein will be attacked from all sides. He will be wounded. He will be bleeding. He will be martyred. But it is just a battle for a few hours, and then it is martyrdom. Imam Zainul Abidin's jihad would last for day after day, week after week. His hands would be bound, his feet would be chained, and he would witness as the beloved family members of Rasulullah were made captives and made to spend their nights in the dungeon of Ibn Ziyad in Kufa and Yazid in Damascus. Imam Zainul Abidin would have to stand first in the court of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad and then in the court of Yazid, as he would treat the family of the Prophet as if they were his slaves and they had no rights and no dignity. This was the jihad of Imam Zainul Abidin, which was not just for one day or for a few hours, but it was for day after day, month after month. This was the hardship that our fourth Imam remembered in his old age, when people came to him and said that, "O grandson of the Prophet of God, martyrdom is the heritage of your family. Has it not come now the time for you to let your tears come to an end and your mourning to come to its close?" The Imam said that if I can forget the martyrdom of my beloved family members and the followers of my father on Ashura, because that is our legacy, that is our heritage, that is the honor of the family of the Prophet, then my tears will never dry when I remember that Lady Sakina, as a 4-year-old girl, was made a captive, and when she was wounded, she would run in the darkness of the battlefield, having no one to protect her. My tears will never dry when I remember that Lady Zainab, she stood in the court of Yazid, and Yazid would talk to the granddaughter of the Prophet of Allah as if he was worthy of speaking to her. How can I forget the suffering of the family of the Prophet in Kufa and Damascus, even if I were not to shed tears over the suffering of Ahlul Bayt in Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
متوجه زيارت.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين. السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين. السلام على محمد بن علي الباقر. السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. صلوات